Hey, it's Russell Graves coming to you from the barn at Hackberry Farm, and a question I get a lot is, what are your 3 favorite lenses? Well, we're going to look at this question in a couple of ways, so stay with us. You know, in the teaser I told you we were going to look at this a couple of ways, and what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you what 3 lenses of mine are my favorite, but then we're going to dive deep into the data on my computer once we get back to the office, and then really see what the data says. And so with that said, you know, my 3 favorite lenses, it changes over time. It just happens to be what I may be shooting pictures of at that particular time. But if I had to look back at the whole time I've been taking pictures, digital pictures in particular, and answer the question, my 3 favorite lenses, I think, and this is from an anecdotal standpoint, but I think they'd be these. So number one is the Canon 500mm f4 EF lens. Now, even though I shoot mirrorless cameras now, I still use this lens and I use it with the adapter. And the reason why is this lens has been a workhorse. This is the original version of this lens, and I've had very little maintenance done on it. I've just kept it clean, took care of it, and but this thing has served me well. The glass is super sharp. It focuses as fast as I could expect it to focus, which is really, really fast. The bokeh, you just can't beat it in prime lenses, and this Canon is a perfect example of that. The only thing I wish Canon would do is come out with a new 500mm f4, and I might be tempted to upgrade and let this one kind of live out its life, send it into retirement. But this has been a great lens for me. I've had this thing maybe 20 years now. I can't remember exactly when I got it. But this lens replaced the 500mm f4.5 lens I used to have. And so the f4.5 was a little smaller, but a good lens nonetheless. So I got this 500mm f4. I use it on a tripod, I use it on a beanbag. I carry this thing with me all the time when I'm driving around looking for wildlife or when I'm in the field actively shooting wildlife. This thing has served me well. One of the things I do, and I won't count this as a lens, but I'll put a 1.4 extender on this a lot. The 2x extender, I don't know that works as well. It works well, but under a narrow set of circumstances. But you put a 1.4 extender on this lens and then use the crop mode on it, you can get all the way out to 1,000mm, and this whole thing shines. So that's my number 1 favorite lens. My second favorite lens, if I was guessing, would be this workhorse. I've had this thing for a long, long time. I've had this thing since I shot film, but this is a 70-200 f2.8L lens by Canon. And this thing is a good, versatile, all-around kind of lens. If I'm just going to walk around the farm here and look for stuff, oftentimes I'll carry that lens, this lens. You can tell this thing's been used. The paint's chipped off of it. The glass has kind of got a few scratches. It doesn't really affect the image quality. The filter ring is dented. I mean, if I tried to sell this thing, I'd get nothing for it, but this thing is really, it's got a lot of character to it. I've used this lens quite a bit, and it still continues to perform well. This is the original version of this lens. It doesn't even have a internal stabilization. So, but again, it's been a good one for me. I've tried to take care of it as best I can. This one gets beat up quite a bit, but the thing I like about this lens, it's a good intermediate focal length. It works well from 70-200mm lens. I can put the 1.4 extender on this and get me out to 280mm, and then once I throw in the crop factor, and I'm maybe doing my math wrong, I'll put my correction at the bottom, but that'll take me somewhere out to like 420mm. So I can go from 70 to 420mm just by putting a 1.4 extender on and engage in the crop mode in my mirrorless cameras. And so this makes this lens even more versatile when mirrorless cameras came out. Again, never seen the need to upgrade to the newer lens. I really like the way this works. I like the internal zoom on this camera. Some of the newer mirrorless lenses for Canon, they don't have that internal zoom, and I know they tend to creep a little bit, but this one right here, it's just been a good lens for me overall. So my number 3 lens is kind of a newcomer. So when we go look at the data on the computer, it may not bear out that this is one of my 3 favorite lenses, but I think overall, over time, it's going to prove to be such. And that's the Sigma 24-105mm. And so with this lens, I've always wanted that focal length, and for some reason I never got it, but here recently I had a chance to buy one and I bought it. And I bought this one used, as a matter of fact. 24-105, good, versatile, all-around focal length. It will cover a wide range of focal lengths. Again, if I put if I put the 70 to 200 millimeter zoom in the 500 and I put the 1.4 converter on and then use the crop sensor in my camera, I've got a 3-lens setup to go from 24 millimeters all the way to 1,080 millimeters, I think it is in the end. So it's just those 3 lenses just really versatile. Now, you may be asking, why not a 16 to 35? Well, I like a 16 to 35 lens. I think when we look at the data, it'll show that I've used that lens quite a bit as well. But this 24 millimeter, one thing it does for me, and this, follow me here, one of the things it does for me is I tend, when I shoot landscape shots, I tend to want to shoot way, way too wide. And so the one thing that 24 millimeter does is it limits how wide I can go. And it makes me be creative and makes me really pay attention to the scene in front of me before I just go out and just get as wide as I can and shoot a picture like that. So again, this lens right here, well built, just really solid. It's been a good lens in my arsenal. Now, I don't like how it telescopes out like that. I'm not a big fan of that in lenses, but it is what it is. And so far so good. This has been a good one. Now, I told you this was going to be about my 3 favorite lenses, but this is 3 favorite lenses with an asterisk, and the asterisk is this. This is a Canon 85mm f1.2 lens, and this lens is really a good lens. I mean, this may not be for all nature photographers. I use it sparingly for nature. I use it sometimes. I did take it to Rwanda last summer and shoot pictures of mountain gorillas with this lens. And but the thing about this is that at the f1.2, the bokeh on this is just unmatched when you shoot this on a full frame camera compared to other cameras. It doesn't focus as fast as other lenses. It's really sharp though, but still for a portrait lens, it's great. Now in my commercial work that I do, I'll do a fair amount of work, or my editorial work, I'll do a fair amount of work of, say, a farmer or rancher, kind of do a portrait of them for a story. And so I'll use this lens a lot of time for that. So if I had room for, if you told me my favorite 3 lenses, and I could add one more, I'd definitely add this one right here because it's just a great lens. I can't say enough good things about it. Now, on the second part of this video, we're going to go into the office over there at the house, and then we're going to look on the computer and see what the data pans out. So we'll come back here in a minute once we've taken a look at the data. I looked at all the digital pictures I've ever made. If you were to parse this into smaller segments, you'd get different results. But this is looking at history over time. And also, if you look here too, 146 others. Also, instead of having just a ton of data points, I kind of condensed this to just show the most commonly used lenses. And a lot of times, if there's an iPhone picture that's in the group, or if there's a, for some reason, this data doesn't read, it may read the same lens 2 different ways, and I don't know why it does that. But I think it does give us enough information for us to take a look at from an analytical standpoint, a data-driven standpoint, as opposed to just conjecture and me just trying to figure out what lenses that I really use the most. And so if you look at it, the most common lens I used 19% of the time was this Canon EF 500mm f4 IS. Again, version 1, the one I just showed you back in the barn. That's the one I use the most. And if you look something kind of interesting, another 11%, it's that same lens, but it's got an added teleconverter on there. So I use that one lens of all the pictures I've taken. I've used it 30% of the time. So a full third of the images I've taken were with that 500mm f4, either with the teleconverter or without a teleconverter. So bottom line is I was right on that. It's one of my favorite lenses. So coming in at 14% here, you'll see that I've used the Canon EF 700 or 70 to 200 f2.8 lens. Again, I've had that lens for a long time. It's a workhorse, and I've used it a lot. So the data shows me the 500mm lens is used the most. The second lens that's used the most is the 70 to 200. But this is what surprised me here, is this Canon 300mm f2.8. I've used it 7% of the time. Now, the reason why it surprises me is because I've got that lens, and it's a beautiful lens. Of all the telephoto lenses I have, I feel like that's the least versatile lens I have. I'll use it on particular occasions. One of the things I use it for, if I'm doing commercial or editorial work, it's a great portrait lens, believe it or not. If you're shooting kind of these compressed looking environmental portraits, I use that a lot. And I'm guessing I can go back and look and see all the, using Lightroom and their metadata function, I can go look at all the pictures I've taken with a 700mm f2.8. But again, thinking back, I just hardly ever use that lens. I use it from time to time, but apparently whenever I use it a lot. And then here's that 85 millimeter f1.2 lens I use. It's used 5% of the time. And again, just a beautiful lens. I love that lens. And if you look at this on any particular year, like when I was doing a lot more commercial work, 6 or 7 years ago, if you looked at it on that particular year, that percentage would rise up quite a bit just because I used it so much more. And then the next one, and this doesn't surprise me, 4% of the time was the Canon 16 to 35 millimeter f2.8 lens. I still have that lens, but one of the things I've replaced it with is, I mentioned in the talk before, is the 24 to 105, the Sigma lens I talked about. So I use that lens more than I do the 16 to 35. 16 to 35 millimeter lens is fine. Sometimes, and this sounds kind of sacrilegious, sometimes I feel like the 16 millimeters is a little too wide. So I go to the 24 to kind of force myself to think about composition a little more. And instead of just trying to get everything in the picture, I think that's helpful from a landscape standpoint. And then if we go down the list, you've got 4% where no value was recorded. So who knows what happened there. 4% of the time, the 70 to 200 f2.8. So see there, it's the same lens as talked about earlier, but I don't know why it's separated like that. So there's a few flukes in this data. I sure wouldn't write a doctoral thesis about it, but still, it kind of gives you a good insight. This is an older lens I had for a long time, the 17 to 35 millimeter. Used it 4% of the time, and there's 3% that just doesn't show up. And then this 50 millimeter f1.2, 2%. I use it, or this 50 millimeter f1.4. I use it a lot, like I use the 85-1.2 for more portrait work. And then this 800 millimeter f11, 2% of the time. That doesn't surprise me. That's a pretty new lens that I have, and it doesn't surprise me because when I shoot wildlife shots, I just take a lot of pictures just to make sure you get them. And then as you look on down the line, the 150 to 600, I don't even own that lens. That's 1% of the pictures with that. That was actually a lens rental. And then the EF16 to 35 millimeter version 2. That's so the first version I showed you was an old version I have. I have the version 2 now. And then this 500 millimeter f4 shows up another percent. And then the Tokina 12 to 24, the fisheye. So you can see all these lenses. Oh, that Canon EF 500 millimeter f4.5 lens. That's the version I used to have before I replaced it with the f4. That was a little bit smaller version, still a great lens, but I replaced it with the f4 lens some time ago. And then the 300 f4 with the teleconverter. I don't ever remember using that lens. I'm sure I did at some point, and then so on and so forth. Now, the reason why the 24 to 105 doesn't show up on there, because that's a pretty new lens too. So I just haven't shot enough pictures for it with it to show up on this chart. But as I look at the data, aside from the wide angle lens I like using, my two favorite lenses, the 500 f4 and the 70 to 200, indeed show up from a data driven standpoint. Over time, if I keep shooting that 24 to 105, unless I find something to replace it, you'll start seeing it show up. Now, I also bought another brand new lens that doesn't even show up on here yet because I haven't even used it yet, and that's an IRIX 15 millimeter. I bought that specifically for night photography and astrophotography. So, as I mentioned before, depending on the time you pick your data set, it's going to show up differently. Depending on what you're taking a particular pictures of at that given time, it's going to show up differently. But again, I wanted to show you this long look of every image in my Lightroom library and the lenses I use to take all those images. So there you have it. When you look into the numbers, you'll see that my suspicions about my three favorite lenses, actually the data kind of proves that out. But there's a couple of things you need to realize about that data. That data was taking a look over my whole catalog the whole time I've been shooting digital photos to get those numbers. And so as time has shifted throughout the years, what I'm shooting pictures of at any given time tends to change. So if you were to shorten the length of that and pick a particular point in time, you might see three different lenses. But looking at that data, I wanted to kind of get a 10,000 foot view at sort of what those three lenses are I like to shoot. But The three lenses, you know, again, with the caveat of the 85 1.2 lens, that's a pretty special lens all in itself. I might try to figure out a way to sneak that one in, even if I could only take three lenses. The thing about those three particular lenses, you get a lot of coverage. So if you start with the 24 to 105, you get the wide angle all the way to the short telephoto coverage. Really versatile lens. Then you add the 70 to 200 millimeter lens, you get a little bit of overlap of the 24 to 105, and then it'll take you all the way out to 200 millimeters. You get a short telephoto length, which is it's a versatile length. Now, one of the tricks I do when I'm in the field, I'll also take a teleconverter that I can then put on the 70 to 200, which will take it all the way out to 280 millimeters. And then if I use the crop mode in my mirrorless camera, that'll get me all the way out to an equivalent of 420 millimeters. So with two lenses, I can go from 24 millimeters all the way out to 420 millimeters, and on that long edge of that telephoto range, I can do it at f2.8, or not, I'm sorry, f4 with the teleconverter. Really a versatile two lens package that you can take a lot of pictures with. Now with the 500 prime, that lens is a little more limiting, but it's got such positives in terms of what that lens can do, and being a prime, I'm willing to overlook its limitations as far as the focal range of it. But even with that 500 millimeter lens, I can then add a 1.4 converter on it and get it all the way out to 700 millimeters. Then if I use the crop mode on that, it'll take me all the way out to 1050 millimeters. So with that three lens setup I talked about, I can go from 24 millimeters all the way out to 1050 millimeters. And just about any shoot I go on, whether it's going over to Africa, Botswana, or somewhere here in the United States, or just right here at home on Hackberry Farm, that three lens setup is really, really versatile, and I can take a lot of different pictures with it. Now, I like having access to all my different lenses, but sometimes you got to be limited on what you take. So those are my three favorite lenses. Now, it's all situational. If I'm going to go out and shoot nothing but landscapes, I'm probably not going to take that 500 millimeter lens. If I'm going to go shoot macro, I'm probably not going to take the 500 millimeter lens, and I doubt if I take the 24 to 105, I'm going to kind of concentrate on my macro lenses. A couple of weeks ago, we were doing a night skies photography workshop where the telephoto lenses had no use for us on that, so we're using all wide angle lenses. So it's all situational, but my point is, come up with a kit that works really good for you, that matches your style of shooting. Now, as time has gone on, sometimes if I'm shooting a particular, when we look back at that data, if you were to pick a particular point in time, the numbers are going to look vastly different, because with my work as an editorial and commercial photographer, a lot of times I may be shooting a story on someone and something they do. So at that point, I'm just going to use kind of portrait lenses like the 85 1.2 or a wide angle lens, something like that. So the point is put together your lens kit for all the different scenarios you're going to go take pictures of, and that way when it comes time to take pictures of landscapes or macro or wildlife or whatever, you know exactly which lens kit to put together. So over time, your three lenses that are going to be your favorite are going to shift depending on what you're shooting pictures of, but come up with that list and it makes it a whole lot easier to pack in the end. Well, that's all I have for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Come back every week. We're going to have new videos out every week on various topics. Leave a comment below. Tell me what your favorite three lenses are. I'd love to hear it. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, reach out, and I'll see you next time here at Hackberry Farm.